On this Thursday night, from crushing the curve to complacency. Rising uneasiness over BC's rising COVID-19 cases.
We need to communicate with people who aren't hearing us.
And the appeal for celebrity reinforcements. Eyebrow-raising move, what We Charity did just hours before facing the Finance Committee. An out-of-control wildfire.
Absolutely devastating.
Closing in on an Ontario community. Landmark diplomatic deal. The historic agreement between Israel and the UAE. And forget video conferencing.
Magic.
The future is in holograms.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. No matter what phase your province or territory is in, Canadians are inching closer to their pre-pandemic way of life. But there have been many twists and turns along the way. At first, it was Ontario and Quebec representing the majority of confirmed cases of COVID-19, with BC leading the way and flattening the curve. Fast forward to today, and the picture looks a whole lot different. Here are two graphs. One shows BC's daily number of COVID-19 cases, the other Ontario's. Both illustrate the rise and fall of confirmed infections. But take a closer look. At the height of the pandemic in Ontario, April 24th, there were 640 new confirmed cases. On the same day in BC, there were just 72. As the weeks and months passed, in Ontario, the number of new infections slowly fell. And this week, the province reported its lowest number since March. But in BC, there's a whole new trajectory. On Wednesday, 85 new infections were reported, leading to a stark warning from the health minister.
I want to make it clear that this weekend, that if you have banquet halls where private party takes place, you will be seeing environmental health officers and people in public health. And it's our expectation that the limits on the number of people at parties will be in place this weekend everywhere in BC. And should it not be followed, inevitably, consequences must follow.
The majority of the cases are people under 40, and newly released modeling for British Columbia shows the province is trending toward a massive growth in new cases in September. The Premier is so concerned he publicly reached out to Canadian celebrities to get the message out. Sarah MacDonald has our top story tonight.
As the COVID-19 case count continues to creep up across BC, so too does demand at testing sites, where lineups are growing. The province, long considered a global leader in keeping the COVID curve in check.
And now it's creeping up again, and that is concerning. Right now, we are holding our own.
Recording one of its highest ever single-day case counts on Wednesday. Most of those new cases in patients younger than 40.
What you're seeing in Vancouver right now is reflected in the numbers that we've seen in the last little while, where there's been exposure events where larger numbers of people have been exposed.
Exposure events like the ones prompting warnings from health officials to the public and visitors to this Vancouver nightclub last week. During the same period of time, this footage was purportedly recorded inside the establishment, showing dancing and not a whole lot of physical distancing.
We need to work together to flatten the curve.
Along with enlisting hundreds of workers to increase contact tracing, provincial officials are also now directly appealing to homegrown celebrities.
If I'm being honest with myself, I probably should have just called 911.
To use their platforms and influence to fight not only crime, but COVID-19.
A call out to Deadpool right now. Ryan, we need your help up here. Get in touch with us. My number's on the internet. Seth Rogen, another outstanding British Columbian. We need to communicate with people who aren't hearing us.
Of even greater concern is many young adults may be hearing the message but not listening and becoming complacent, prioritizing partying over keeping the pandemic in check. Sarah MacDonald, Global News, Vancouver.
To Ontario next, where after weeks of criticism over its back-to-school plan, the provincial government is freeing up $500 million in funding to help cover costs related to the pandemic. This includes $50 million for upgrades to ventilation, $18 million in staff and support for online learning, and $15 million for new technology. Ontario's Education Minister Stephen Lecce says it's an unprecedented measure to combat an unprecedented situation.
When combined with our previous commitments made over the past few weeks, this means that school boards will be able to access nearly $900 million in targeted one-time funding to prepare them for a safe return to school.
Ontario's school reopening plan has sparked protests and threats of legal action. Parents and teachers have been pushing for reduced class sizes. Lecce says the money can be used to hire teachers. It can also be used to find new spaces for classrooms. To New Brunswick next, it released its updated plan for the upcoming school year today, and this includes a comprehensive plan to help kids be safe on school buses. Students in kindergarten to grade 5 who are not required to wear a mask will sit alone or with a member of their household. Students in grades 6 to 12, they can sit with someone else, but they both have to be wearing a mask. Clear curtains will be installed to provide a physical barrier with bus drivers. Students will have to sit in the same seats every day, and whenever possible, buses will be filled from the back to the front to reduce congestion and to help with physical distancing. As you may know, many children in the United States, they are already back in school. And of course, here in Canada, we are watching closely. Cases of COVID-19 there have exploded among students. More than 2,000 kids, teachers, and staff members have been quarantined in 5 states after infections were reported. Some schools are closing as quickly as they reopened. But as Jennifer Johnson reports, that's not sitting well with President Donald Trump.
A dire warning from the head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. 95% of Americans need to wear masks in public, or this pandemic will enter an even deadlier phase.
This could be the worst fall from a public health perspective we've ever had.
Over 1,500 Americans died of COVID-19 Wednesday, the highest one-day death toll since mid-May. Schools are being forced to close as quickly as they're reopening. Georgia's North Paulding High School opened last week with scenes like this going viral. Then after 35 cases, the school had to close.
There can be steps taken to make in-person learning safe, but I don't think the board has taken those steps.
Schools are closing in Louisiana, too, with hundreds of people now in quarantine. A judge in Houston, Texas, put the brakes on in-class learning in that city. Teachers near New York City have grave concerns about reopening next month.
I would love for the lawmakers to come down and just be able to see classrooms such as the ones in Yonkers. You know, we're overcrowded. A lot of the times there's no ventilation.
But U.S. President Donald Trump is still demanding schools reopen, even threatening federal funding cuts if they don't, although only Congress has that authority. Meanwhile, in hard-hit Florida, another mask mandate battle. The sheriff of Marion County has ordered his deputies and staff not to wear masks. Even the public coming in for help can't wear them, despite a countywide mask mandate. Council members held an emergency meeting on the sheriff's decision.
It's a little bit disturbing because that means I can get stopped for a ticket, and then all of a sudden, you know, this officer could be carrying COVID.
The mask battle still raging on in many states, as health officials warn wearing them is the best defense Americans have in stopping this potentially deadly virus. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
President Trump is vowing to block funding for the U.S. Postal Service that would aid mail-in voting.
It's going to be the greatest fraud in the history of elections.
So the Democrats, they want to give the agency billions of dollars to process an anticipated surge in mail-in ballots because of the pandemic. Trump admits the funding is needed, but refuses to agree to a COVID-19 response bill if it includes a boost to the Postal Service. Trump has long criticized voting by mail, falsely claiming it would lead to rampant fraud in the November election. Turning now to a big controversy out of Canada, and this is surrounding the We Charity and its multi-million-dollar deal with the federal government. The organization says it's now registered as a lobbyist, months after it began working on the now abandoned student grant program. Our Abigail Bimman has been following some key testimony this afternoon. Abigail, bring us up to speed.
Well, Farah, as the details of this entire affair unfolded and we learned about a number of communications between the We organization and ministers and government officials, including in the Prime Minister's office, We was heavily criticized for not being registered to lobby. The opposition has called for the lobbying commissioner to investigate. And now, just hours before We staff members appeared at committee, they decided to register as lobbyists, though they didn't offer context about why now.
In terms of the registration for the Lobbying Act, we did that. It was submitted today, and that was done. And again, just want to say, if we had thought that was necessary before, we would have done it.
Abigail, there were also questions raised about the money we had promised to pay back the government. Any clear answers today about that?
Well, as Global News reported 2 days ago, WE says it has paid back 22 of the $30 million given to it by the government to run the now canceled student grant program. But it's really unclear why they haven't paid back the rest yet. WE seems to be blaming the government for not accepting it.
We're in the process right now, working as quickly as we can with the government to return it. They're guiding the process. They're currently in a bank account, not earning any interest.
Meanwhile, Minister Bardish Chagger's office tells us the Department, Employment and Social Development Canada, is in the process of ending the agreement, and they've told We Charity Foundation what the process for repayment is. But they won't tell us why the whole thing is taking so long. During testimony, WE's executive director said it was a difficult and emotional week as they had to lay off staff. The Canadian press is reporting the layoffs affect dozens of people in Canada and the UK, and they're looking at selling off real estate holdings in Toronto. Farah?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Thank you, Abigail. A forest fire in northern Ontario is creeping closer to a small community.
Absolutely devastating.
About 3,800 people have left Red Lake, Ontario. The growing blaze, which started on Monday, now covers 550 hectares and is just 2 kilometers away from the town. A few hundred evacuees are now taking shelter in communities like Dryden, Ontario. Deepening despair in Belarus. Coming up, the intensifying protests and the mystery around one man's fate. In Belarus, huge crowds of protesters swarmed the streets for the 5th day to denounce a police crackdown on demonstrations. Protesters accused the country's president of rigging last Sunday's presidential election to win a 6th term. In several areas, hundreds of women formed long lines of solidarity. Many carried portraits of loved ones who have been detained during the protests. American Marissa Lama Durham says on Wednesday morning, armed forces raided the house where she was staying with her boyfriend, Belarusian Stas Gorelik, and they took him into custody. They are both academics studying the former Soviet region, and Durham says they have nothing to do with the opposition movement. She says she hasn't been able to have any contact with Gorelik, and she's very worried about him.
I could see Stas one last time before, they had him in handcuffs and they took him away. They just took him away, and we don't know anything else.
At least 6,700 people have been arrested during the protests, and at least 2 people have died. For only the 3rd time, Israel has struck a peace deal normalizing relations with one of its Middle East Arab neighbors, the United Arab Emirates. The 2 nations will soon exchange ambassadors and embassies. It comes with a pledge from Israel to suspend its claims to a part of the Palestinian territories that it had been discussing annexing. As Redmond Shannon reports, the historic deal delivered a key foreign policy victory to U.S. President Donald Trump.
For a president scrambling with a pandemic and bad polls, brokering this deal counts as a win.
By uniting 2 of America's closest and most capable partners in the region, something which said could not be done, this deal is a significant step towards building a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Middle East.
And for a prime minister facing a corruption trial, it's also welcome news.
This is the greatest advancements toward peace between Israel and the Arab world in the last 26 years, and it marks the 3rd formal peace between Israel and an Arab nation.
Israel and the United Arab Emirates will soon exchange ambassadors and begin formal trade, the Gulf nation joining Egypt and Jordan in the Middle East in normalizing relations with Israel.
It's certainly a historical watershed, but I think there's more to it than meets the eye. And I think what has cemented this has been a mutual fear of Iran.
In other words, my enemy's enemy is my friend, or at least my diplomatic relation. The UAE and Israel had reportedly already been cooperating in military drills.
Now that the ice has been broken, I expect more Arab and Muslim countries will follow the United Arab Emirates lead.
If Saudi Arabia ever does so, Iran could start to feel cornered in the Middle East. As part of the deal, Israel has suspended its plans to annex the Jordan Valley in the Palestinian territories. A plan Benjamin Netanyahu found a hard sell anyway.
There was tremendous opposition to annexation throughout the world, and quite a powerful opposition from the Jewish diaspora, from Britain, from Canada, from America, from Australia.
A statement from Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas denounced the deal, and the Palestinian ambassador in Abu Dhabi has been recalled. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Lebanon's parliament has approved a 2-week state of emergency that gives extensive power to the military. And human rights groups fear it may be used to suppress protests that have broken out after that deadly explosion in Beirut. This is new video from inside Beirut's St. George Hospital. It shows the moment of the blast. A nurse at the NICU was sitting at her desk when it happened. She was forced to climb out from under the debris. She and a doctor ran 5 kilometers through the devastation, carrying 3 babies to find a working hospital. Luckily, all 3 babies survived.
They were all asleep at that moment, so I felt a moment of peace when I had them back in this incubator.
Today, the FBI announced it will join Lebanese and other international investigators as the investigation of the explosion at Beirut's port goes on. At least 170 people were killed. More than 6,000 others were injured. Still ahead, why smokers in Spain are about to get smoked out in the pandemic. Officials in Spain are trying to curb COVID-19 by cracking down on smokers. Starting Friday, the Canary Islands will ban smoking in outdoor spaces where physical distancing can't be maintained. The region of Galicia already imposed a similar ban, and cities like Madrid and Valencia are considering following suit. Spain has the worst infection rate of COVID-19 in Western Europe. There's growing concern contaminated food shipments could cause new outbreaks of COVID-19. 2 cities in China have found traces of the novel coronavirus on frozen food. The virus was discovered on chicken wings imported from Brazil and on the outer packaging of frozen Ecuadorian shrimp. Chinese officials traced and tested everyone who might have come into contact with the products. All results were negative. Many viruses can survive up to 2 years in freezing temperatures, but the World Health Organization says it's highly unlikely that people can contract COVID-19 from food or food packaging. Officials in New Zealand are also looking into frozen freight as a possible transmission route. An individual who works for a cold storage company is linked to a new and growing outbreak in Auckland. Officials say there are now at least 17 infected people. A lockdown put in place to extinguish this outbreak could extend beyond the initial 3 days. The virus had been in check in New Zealand, but now there are long lines at virus testing sites as concern grows.
How do they do that, or how are they doing that?
Hologram from home. Next, an Ontario company wants to make meetings 3D again. A California police officer is being hailed a hero for a heart-racing rescue.
1-1. I'll be out with the bell stack on the tracks, trying to get him out. Can you get out?
This is footage from her body camera. It shows the officer racing toward a man after realizing his wheelchair is stuck on the train tracks. She manages to drag him off the tracks seconds before the train goes by. The 66-year-old man was taken to hospital as his leg was injured, but of course it could have been much worse. Whether playing police or playing chef, kids love pretending to be adults. Well, now they can pretend to work from home. Fisher-Price has launched My Home Office. It includes a toy headset and laptop, essentials for the new workplace reality. Now, while in real life programs like Zoom and Skype help communicate with colleagues, one Ontario company is promoting a more realistic version of the virtual meeting. Mike Drolet explains.
Please unclick your mute.
Connecting with one another has never been so easy.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? You're on.
And frustrating. If we're not attached to a robot, we're on the always entertaining virtual conference call.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not hearing any sound.
And yes, it works, but only in smaller numbers. Connecting with larger audiences, well, who knows when we'll be allowed to do that. And that's where a Toronto company called Art Media is hoping to step in. They've used holograms to transport the likes of Tony Robbins and Stephen Hawking to conferences around the world. But with less traveling because of COVID, they've gone smaller, with a focus on healthcare, education, and finance.
Instead of having to get on a plane and travel for 24 hours to do a consult or to do a lecture or to educate people, say, in Singapore, you can just beam in, do your 45 minutes, do live Q&A, and then if you want to, you could beam in next to Tokyo and do this exact same thing again. So we make important people really, really efficient.
In this COVID-19 world, doing a face-to-face interview like this without a mask is a no-no, except Larry's not here. He's in a room all by himself next door. And he could be anywhere in the world right now.
In 2019, 250 people gathered for the Blockchain Awards in Toronto. The show saw its numbers quadruple in 2020 when it went virtual. And its full hologram experience this fall is expected to be even larger.
We're talking about audiences in China, in Brazil, in Europe, and other parts of the world. We hope to have an audience that is at a minimum 10 times what we were able to create using only a physical space.
It should come as no surprise that studies show face-to-face meetings are more effective than conference calls or emails.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
It's just a movie, but in Star Wars, Princess Leia chose a hologram message over sending a letter. And look how that turned out. Of course, there are drawbacks to holograms.
Just like, so nice meeting you, Larry.
But in a pandemic, who's shaking hands anyway? Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
It seems the future is now, and that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is the sunrise over the village of Coutts, Alberta, next to the border with Montana. If you'd like to share your Canada with us, please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you so much for watching. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other. Good night.